Hello, my name is Hans George Campbell. Today I wanted to show you and talk about an HL scale trains module that I built years ago. My friend Barrie and I used to have a model railroading store in Hillsboro, Oregon. We specialized in the N scale and HL scale trains. I built this HL scale module for the store. It is 1 foot deep by 4 feet long. It was used to show customers the different areas of model railroading. It was also used to demonstrate the sound-equipped DCC locomotives. One of the services that my store offered was installing DCC decoders into customers' locomotives. This module came in handy for testing those locomotives after the work was done. Okay. In this next picture here, we can see the left-hand side of the module showing the waterway and the gantry crane. The locomotive is a Bachmann Alco S2. It is DCC equipped and sound equipped. It's a very nice locomotive. And the freight car that's pushing and pulling is a 40-foot gondola. The way I did the waterway was I first painted the wood underneath the plexiglass an olive drab gray. Well, a greenish gray color. Okay, actually more of a green, more of an olive drab green color, because that's what the color of the water is here in Oregon. And then I took and I cut a piece of plexiglass to fit on top, and I sanded only one side of the plexiglass, the side that faces down toward the painted part of the wood. And the top part of the plexiglass I left smooth and shiny. And it created the illusion of depth. You don't see it in this picture, but when you're looking straight down at it, it created the illusion of depth, and it did a pretty good job of creating water. It really did. In fact, this is the way it was done in the old days, you know, except instead of using plexiglass, model railroaders would use actual glass for water. Yeah. Okay, in this picture, we could see a close-up view of the gantry crane. Now, the gantry crane was modeled after a real gantry crane. I found some pictures on the internet of a gantry crane that was very close to this one. And it was basically a silver gray color like this, and the main part was blue. In fact, this exact blue color. And of course the weighted hook was like yellow, like caution yellow. And so I decided, well, okay, that's what I'm going to paint this model here of gantry crane. You know, I'll paint it that same color, the same color that was on the real one. And then I also wanted to show you how I did the tracks that the gantry crane rides on. Those are 2 pieces of wood. They're basically 3/4 inch by 1/2 inch, and they're about a foot long, you know, 12 inches long. And then I used my table saw to cut that slit down the middle. Okay. And then I sanded and I painted those pieces of wood with a concrete colored flat paint. And I let that dry for a few days. And then I masked it off and I spray painted the slit part in there, the groove part in the wood, like a silver gray, like a metal metallized color. And I think it turned out pretty good. And this is how the tracks are done for the real gantry cranes. There's a like a metal rail or railing that's in concrete, solid concrete, and the gantry crane rides on these rails. And so the way I did this is prototypical. It's just like the real one. Yeah. Also in this picture you see a better view of the locomotive. I think it's just a beautiful locomotive. Those Alco S2s are just absolutely gorgeous. Okay, in this picture we see the right-hand side of the module. On the front of the module you see the NCE panel for the power cab. This is a DCC module. You see the backdrop buildings. You see the little tool storage shed, and you also see the front of the bunkhouse. And of course, you see my second gondola freight car, and you see the vehicles, and you see two of my custom lighted bumpers. Okay, in this picture we see some of the roof detailing on one of my backdrop buildings. In this picture we see the bunkhouse, a couple of cars parked in front. Bunkhouses were often around the real waterfront areas, you know, where the ships would come in. You know, it was for guys that had to. They spent like a few days there. Or they spent a couple of weeks there. You know, they couldn't go home. They had to be there when the ships came in. So you would often see or find these bunkhouses around the shipyards. And this is where the guys could get, you know, they could sleep, they could take a shower, they could cook their meals or whatever. They could have some recreation, you know, play cards or board games or whatever, you know, watch TV while they're waiting for the ships to come in. And the windows would often face the waterways, so they could actually see the ships coming in from inside the bunkhouse. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. This shows a clear picture of that bunkhouse, and you can see a little truck parked near the loading dock, and you also see the trackside shanty. Okay, so let's go to the next picture. In this picture, we see how I did the turnout. I actually installed the throw bar. Now this is how the real turnouts are done. There's a lever that you flip, and that moves the rails back and forth. And so it's done this way on the model as well. This actually works, and it works really well. And I painted the size of the rails rust color because that's the way it is on rail tracks. Only the tops are usually smooth and shiny, but the sides of the rails, they usually rust over time. You know, so I decided, well, okay, I'll go ahead and paint the sides of these rails rust color. If I had to do this all over again, I would have chose a much darker flat brown color for the rust, because I think this is a little bit too bright, but I think it's okay for the model. I mean, it turned out pretty good. This also showed how I ballasted the cork roadbed. I think it turned out pretty good. And it also shows how I nailed down the track, and I painted the tops of the nails with a flat black paint or a matted black paint so that they would blend in with the track ties. And this is Code 100 track, Atlas Code 100 track. Okay, so let's go to the next picture. This picture shows one of my custom bumpers. I make these and I sell them. I spray paint them, And after the paint dries, I solder in a 5mm red LED and a 2K ohm resistor. That's to limit the current down to around 10 milliamps. Even though the LED is rated at between 20 and 30 milliamps, I have a 2K ohm resistor in there to lower the current down to about 10 milliamps because I wanted it to glow a more realistic glow. I didn't want it to be too bright, you know. And it works really well. And the LED serves two purposes. One, it's for looks. It looks really cool. And two, it tells me if there's DCC power going to the rails, to each one of the tracks. So if this is not lit up, that means there's a problem with the power going to the rails. I need to check my DCC system. But yeah. But this is a picture of the custom, one of the custom bumpers that I make, and I sell these. Well, I used to sell them. And these sold pretty good. I usually sold them for $5 a piece, and people would snatch them up like hotcakes. You know, they'd buy them up. If I had to sell them today, I'd have to get at least $10 a piece for them. You know, because prices have gone up on the Atlas Code 100 track, so I'd have to charge a little bit more. Yeah, but it also shows, you know, how I did the ballasting, the cork road bed, and how I did some of the scenery. Okay, in this picture, it shows this is an inverted cone warm white LED, and it's used for lighting up buildings, you know, model railroading buildings, and it works really well. I have a current limiting resistor soldered in, and then I heat shrunk the whole thing. And the LED is up high enough to where when I put the bunkhouse over it, the LED is up toward the ceiling of the building. And so the light shines outward toward the windows, and it looks, you know, realistic. It looks really good. And because it's a warm white light, not a cool white, it looks more like incandescent lighting, what you would normally find back then, because I was modeling the 50s. So we didn't have LED lighting back then. We had incandescent lighting, which is a warm light, you know. But anyway, this is how I light up my buildings. Okay, this here is, it shows how I wired the NCE panel for the power cab. It also shows how I screwed in some rubber feet for the bottom of the module to make it look more professional, you know. The larger red wire, that's the positive bus wire. That's the main bus wire. It's 18 gauge. And the smaller wires, those are feeder wires. And they're, I believe, 22 gauge. This picture shows the negative bus wire and two feeder wires that are soldered to it. And this picture shows how I fastened the main bus wires. There's a positive bus wire, which is red, and there's a negative bus wire, which is black, and it goes throughout the whole length of the module. And this is how it's fastened on each end. And then there's a wood piece going across every few feet. I think it's every 2 feet or 1 foot or something like that. And there's holes, small holes drilled in that wood, and the bus wires pass through those holes. So it keeps the bus wires from draping down past the main frame of the module, and it works out pretty good. The bus wire is tight enough, it's taut enough to where it stays in place. And then I have something to solder on the feeder wires, you know. Anyway, this is how I did that. Okay, so now I'm going to show you just the buildings, not sitting on the layout. Okay, this is an industrial water tower, and I basically glued it together and then I masked it off with blue painter's tape, and I spray painted the different areas. This is all spray painted. It's not hand painted. It's all been spray painted with just cans of spray paint. These are two of the small buildings. The one on the left is an electrical building for the electrical parts for like the turnouts and the signal lights and things like that. That's what that building's for. And I spray painted it with Krylon nickel shimmer paint, and I let that dry for a few days, and then I hand painted the muddy brown color on the base, and I think it turned out, pretty good. You'll often see these near turnouts and signal areas on the rail trains. You'll actually see these little electrical stations everywhere. Okay, the building on the right, that is a tool shed, or a shed where railroads keep their supplies, and you'll often see those along the track. So, and that's all been spray painted. I glued it together, and then I masked it off and spray painted it. And the barrels there, they're just sitting on top of the porch there. So it's just for extra, added detail. I think it turned out pretty good. Okay, this is the gantry crane. And again, I got pictures off the internet of a gantry crane that looked just like this one. And this is the color that gantry crane was painted. So I wanted to paint mine to look just like a real one. So, this is the results, the result of that work. But anyway, let's go to the next picture. Okay, this is the bunkhouse. And again, I glued this together, and then I masked it off and spray painted it. Now, I didn't glue the windows in until after I finished spray painting the building. But I made sure that I masked off the inside where the windows would be glued in. Okay, I masked that off before spray painting because glue, modeling cement, will not stick to painted areas of plastic. So you have to make sure that that's masked off. And after I finished spray painting the whole building, then the last thing I did was I glued in the windows. And I think it turned out pretty good, It's a real easy way of making these buildings, Now, I could have weathered this to further bring out the details of the bricks and the windows and things like that. And I could have painted the concrete walkway there concrete color, and actually weather that to bring out the details. And I could have glued a person standing next to the door, or some guy standing around, talking or whatever. I could have glued put some trash cans there, maybe a light post or something, I could have done that. But I just decided just to do it simple, like this. I think it still turned out pretty good. And this is the trackside shanty. It was actually part of a larger building. I believe this was part of the Atlas lumber mill. I didn't like the lumber mill. I thought it was a stupid looking building. But I liked this shanty, this office part of that building. So I cut the base, because I wanted to use just this. This was the office of that building. So I thought, well, this will make a good trackside shanty or building. And so that's what I did. I cut the base, and I rounded it off to where it looks, like it's part of the ground. I glued the building together, and of course masked it off and spray painted it. And after I spray painted it, I glued the window and the door on afterwards. Of course, I masked it off first just to make sure that there wasn't any paint where the window and the door would be glued. And then I just glued the whole assembly onto the base. But before I did that, I sanded the base a little bit just to roughen up that plastic. And then after I glued the building onto the base, I glued on the grass and the dirt, the scenery texturing that you see on the base. I glued that on. I don't like gluing my buildings directly to the layout. I like to be able to remove them if I need to, including buildings like this. So I found that by gluing the texturing onto the plastic, you can set the building on the layout and it helps it blend in with the rest of the layout without gluing the building down. And I just think it's better that way. Okay, this shows one of the backdrop buildings. These were some extra parts that I had laying around, and this is called kit bashing, where you take parts from different kits and you put them together to form a building. And that's what I did here. I had extra parts from different kits, and I took those parts and I put them together to form this backdrop building. And I think it turned out pretty good, you know. This here is a Wathers kit, and it was a real pain in the ass to put this building together. Oh my God. Especially the fire escape. I remember having to glue all those little small pieces, and oh my God, it was a real pain in the ass to do that. But how I did this, I glued the whole thing together first. I didn't glue the windows and doors in. I left those off. And I masked off the inside because I didn't want to get any paint around where the windows and the doors would have to be glued in later on. You know, that has to be bare plastic. But I did paint, I paint the whole building with this light beige color. Okay. And I let that dry for a few days. Then I masked it off and I spray painted the loading dock with the concrete color. And I let that dry for a few days. And then I hand painted all the silver areas that you see on the building, the front of the building. And I had to use a technique called dry brushing to paint the silver paint onto the fire escape. Because I didn't want to get any of that silver paint on the walls themselves. So I had to use a technique called dry brushing. Okay, and it worked out pretty good. You know, I think it worked out pretty good. And then after that all dried, then the last thing I did was I glued in the doors and the windows. I didn't realize how dark that green was until after I assembled the building. If I had to do this all over again, I would have painted those windows and doors like a light brown color or a light gray color. I think they would have looked a little bit nicer, but it still turned out good. You know, it still turned out good. And then the roof details, that's a separate kit, and I spray painted those and just set them on top of the roof. But yeah, this building, it turned out, I think, pretty good, you know. Okay, well, that's it. I just wanted to show you guys this HO scale module that I built years ago for my train store. My name is Hans George Campbell, and until next time.